Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Emma's Masterclass, Rhythms and Focus, Practical Strategies for Music Managers, ADHD-Friendly, with Music Industry ADHD Coach, Tristan Hunt. It's really great to see so many of you here. My name is Michelle Ronquillo, and I am Emma's event manager. Just a little bit about us. Within Emma, we unite music managers organizations across 13 European countries, which represent more than 2,000 managers across Europe. We've made it our mission to strengthen European managers globally through our Empower program, which encompasses education, advocacy, networking, and research. If you want to know more, or if you want to stay up to date with the upcoming events, make sure to visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our WhatsApp group. You can find the links in the chat in a little bit. Also, when you log off Zoom at the end of the session, a super brief survey will pop up. Please take a moment to fill it out, as your feedback is really appreciated and will help us massively to improve the upcoming events. So I'm just going to share the agenda of today. So as I said, today we are the theme of today of this masterclass is Rhythms Focus, Practical Strategies for Music Managers, ADHD Friendly, with Music Industry ADHD Coach, Tristan Hunt. And there are some time for questions, and I will encourage you to add them to the chat. So I will read them out loud at when Tristan is ready. And without further ado, let's get into it. Over to you, Tristan.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Michelle. Lovely to meet you all here today. Thank you for making time for this at the end of what I'm sure are very hot and busy days for people across Europe. Hopefully what we share here will be useful and relevant for you in your work. There's going to be opportunities to ask questions. Please do share those in the chat with Michelle, and we'll take some time to go through those through the course of the presentation. So today we're really looking at sort of how ADHD shows up for artists and music industry professionals, specifically within your management work, and the sort of tools and tips and techniques that we can use practically on a day-to-day basis to help those people that we work with that might have ADHD. So as Michelle kindly introduced me, my name is Tristan Hunt. I've been working in the music industry for over 20 years. Before launching this coaching practice, specifically for people that work in the music industry with ADHD, I spent the last 4.5 years working for the Association for Electronic Music, the global trade body for the genre, so working across 27 countries and I think 380 different businesses, looking at sort of all aspects of the industry. And the work that I've produced here is very much for everybody that works in the music industry, but that specifically has the condition of ADHD. So that people can come to me without needing to explain what it's like to be an artist, a touring artist, working in sync, publishing, a manager. And we can just dive straight into how their ADHD is showing up for them within their role. So what you'll learn today, so we're really looking, I won't read through these, please have a look if you will. We're really looking at sort of the sorts of things you can do to change the environment in which you're working, which your artists are working in, to help them with their ADHD, to give them tools and tips and techniques, routines, the sorts of things that are really going to help to ground them in their busy day-to-day life and make them more productive, more focused, and more able to do their job well, whilst really hopefully enjoying their work far more as well. So we'll dive into those now. So first off, what is ADHD? So many of you probably familiar with the term ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a little bit of a misnomer from my side. ADHD is the official medical term in the DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual Volume 5, which psychiatrists use to diagnose the condition. But I say it's a bit of a misnomer because it's not, for most people, it's not a deficit of attention. It's too much attention for everything. We get so easily distracted. And that can make it very hard to focus on the thing in hand. So it's not a deficit of attention, it's too much attention for everything. And is it a disorder? Well, clinically, that's how it's termed. But we might look across our industry and actually see it as a huge strength. That ADHD enables something called non-sequential thinking, this ability to put lots of disparate ideas together into one new idea. Something that a lot of other people find very difficult, people with ADHD can find very easy. So, of course, this is why we often find a lot of people with ADHD working in our business, because it's such an ideas-driven space. So just again, sort of a little bit of an overview here on the condition. I've touched on this already a little bit. If you're working with people with ADHD, you might read through this and go, actually, you know, that's familiar. I'm seeing that. Maybe if you've got ADHD yourself, of course, this is probably super familiar. But if you're working with artists that have it, you're probably seeing some of these aspects within their day-to-day patterns of working and behavior. And we are looking specifically today to see how you can help support artists and individuals with a condition that might be showing up with these traits.
Tristan, can I just interrupt you for a little bit? The presentation is not showing.
When did it stop showing?
It hasn't showed at all.
Oh, wow. Okay. Far out. Okay. So, okay. We're going to need to start again then. We did a screen share, didn't we? And then we took it off screen share before we started.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is. Okay. Okay. So I will rewind through this very quickly because yes, apologies for that, everybody. This is a presentation around ADHD. We're looking at ADHD and how it shows up within the music industry, specifically for managers and for artists. I'm going to move through these reasonably quickly because we've just sort of touched on these, albeit verbally. I'm so sorry I didn't know that wasn't showing through until then. So a little bit about me. This is what I was just talking through. So 20 years in the music industry. Formerly working for the Association for Electronic Music, global trade body for the genre. I got diagnosed at the age of 40, so 4 years ago. And when I got diagnosed, I've been working for about 6 or 7 years championing mental health. So I've spoken at pretty much every electronic music industry conference around the world, to thousands of people around our industry on the topic of mental health. But when I got diagnosed, there was nobody that understood the music industry and ADHD. And being where I was, understanding about mental health and being so connected in mental health and seeing that, I was like, well, there's an absence of this. So I decided to retrain as an ADHD coach, and then obviously specialize within the music industry, playing to my strengths there. And so that's now what I do full time. So again, just sort of very quickly, what you'll learn to in the course of this call, we touched on this a bit already. And as someone with ADHD, I'll just put my hand up and say, I find it very hard, if not impossible, to go back over things when I've just done them. So that's on me, but that's part of the condition. The ADHD brain works in one of 2 ways. It shows up to work. We have new and interesting equals dopamine. Dopamine is a neuromodulator, neurotransmitter that people with ADHD chronically lack. And this is where we can go into focus, hyperfocus, when there's a lot of dopamine associated to it. And then the other side is urgency with severe consequences. This is where we have a deadline perhaps, and the brain produces another set of neurotransmitters, neuromodulators, noradrenaline or norepinephrine if you're in the States. I know we're all in Europe, so probably noradrenaline for most of us. Sort of like a fight or flight reflex. We can get stuff done, but it's incredibly stressful often. And that's why we'll often, chasing people, we're chasing an artist perhaps for ages for getting a contract back, or even to get paid, and they're not able to do it because unless that noradrenaline is there or the dopamine is there, the task won't get done. The brain is not able to activate. And so with what I was just saying there, I come into the call with quite a lot of noradrenaline because I'm like, I really want to deliver for you guys and make sure this is really good. Super interested, obviously, because it's a topic that I'm interested in. So I've got lots of these brain transmitters. But the moment the novelty goes, so the moment I have to walk back and go over some sort of old familiar things, which is just the last few slides I've done, those brain chemicals go. So it makes it very hard then to think. And we'll come on, I'm mentioning that because you might see this come up in sort of the lives of some of the people you work with. If it's old, it's boring, it's got no novelty to it, it's often very difficult to get them to engage. So yeah, I hope that's a useful context. So what is ADHD? Just sort of touched on this. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is the full name. And it's not a deficit of attention, it's too much attention for everything. It's about focusing. Our attention is the tricky bit. This was the explainer that I think we got up to when Michelle said that we weren't showing the presentation. So just gives you an overview really of the subject. I'm not going to go into too much detail because you'll either be familiar with this already or we're going to cover this anyway through the course of the presentation. And you're going to get a copy of the presentation afterwards as well. So all this information you can sort of move through in your own time really really carefully and quietly. But essentially with ADHD, we've got three main presentation types. We've got hyperactive, which is the classic sort of bouncy little boy at school, if you like. Naughty little boy gets into trouble. And then we've got inattentive, which is the inability to focus on a topic. Now, women as a group tend to have the inattentive subtype of ADHD more. I'm a guy and I have ADHD myself, but I have the inattentive subtype, so it's not specific to one gender or the other. But women tend to have the inattentive subtype a bit more. What that means and what that has meant is that women as a group have got chronically underdiagnosed for ADHD. So what we see in the industry at the moment are far more men, up until recently, getting diagnosed and being treated for the condition. So that there is equal number, as from the prevailing scientific research that's out there at the moment, there's an equal number of men and women that have the condition. It's just that because the inattentive subtype isn't as pronounced as the naughty little boy jumping around, women haven't been diagnosed. So that's just a footnote that's hopefully useful. And then we've got combined type, where you've got both hyperactive, lots of movement, lots of energy, and inattentive, an inability to bring our attention to bear. Okay, so how common is ADHD in the music industry? We think that around about 5% of adults in Europe have ADHD. It's probably like 4 to 5%, something like that. A piece of research that I led for the Association for Electronic Music before beginning my practice was all around looking at neurodiversity within the music industry, principally across North America, Europe, and Australasia, but mainly Europe. And the results that we found, having done this relatively small data sample, but still maybe indicative, that we think maybe anywhere between sort of like 40 to 50%, based upon this data sample of our industry, might have ADHD and another neurodiverse condition: dyslexia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, autism. What we often find is that these conditions are what's known as comorbid, or co-joined, or coexisting. So you have ADHD with autism, ADHD with dyslexia. I have ADHD, dyslexia, and dyscalculia. So we basically think that this is a pretty common condition. But why do we see more of it in the music industry, maybe? Well, to that earlier point, we have an industry that's all about ideation. It's all about creativity. So with that sort of honeypot, if you like, of creativity, of course, is it any wonder that we're drawing more ADHD people towards the work we do? Not at all. Of course, it makes perfect sense, because this is their strength. Coming up with ideas, developing ideas is what people with ADHD are great at. Executing them, putting them into practice, and finishing them, maybe not so much sometimes. Depends on what it is, but often they are challenges. So as managers with artists that have ADHD, what are the kind of things we're doing? So we're looking to help our artists with planning and management skills. We're looking to help with emotional regulation. We're looking to help with healthier self-esteem and relationships, clearer judgment, self-motivation, time management skills, and a greater sense of self-efficacy. With ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition that affects part of the brain principally. It affects 4 parts, but for the purpose of today, we're just going to look at the prefrontal cortex. The PFC is this front part of the brain, the most recent part of the human brain, actually, where we have this psychological term called executive functions. Some of you might be familiar with executive functional functions. So this is time management, planning, organization, execution, working memory, whole host of things that are associated to our day-to-day lives, which, if you've got ADHD, are very challenging. So this can mean that the things mentioned there are very difficult for people with ADHD, which is why we would like to give the artists and people we work with that have the condition a scaffold, so that they can see and feel time, that they can work to a goal which is visible. If it's not visible, it might as well not be there. We talk about it being now or not now. People with ADHD have something called time blindness, can't feel the passage of time. This is relating to the reduced amounts of dopamine in the body, but we'll come on to that in more detail. Okay, so here are some tips that you can share with your artists and colleagues that are hopefully useful. I'm going to move through these reasonably quickly, and then we'll have time for a few questions, and then if we've got more time, we can dive into this in an even deeper way. Supporting their routine is crucial. So in order for a person with ADHD to feel comfortable, safe, and secure, they need a routine. The challenge is that they often don't want a routine. They want to be free form, doing whatever they're doing, because routines can feel uncomfortable. So this is where sort of coaching can be really helpful, that we help the person to build a routine that's effective for them. They are choosing what the routine is. So if you're working with an artist, you're asking lots of questions, you're asking the sort of things that would be helpful for them. You're not imposing anything on them. If it's imposed, and they feel restricted, they'll push back against it. It's not going to happen. So routines are vital for helping a person with ADHD be productive and effective. We want to keep the actions simple. If you're asking someone with ADHD to do something, one sentence, one item, one sentence. We're not asking compound questions. We're not giving them lots of information. Impairment of working memory means that they can't hold that in the mind's eye. It's going to be too difficult. They won't retain it. They might nod enthusiastically and, put their thumbs up and high five and say that they're definitely going to go and do it, and they promise. It's gone. Okay, so we need to communicate verbally, and then we need to follow up with written instructions. So we had a great verbal conversation that's gone really well. Bullet point follow-up, maybe in an email or whatever, if you're using WhatsApp or Teams or something like that, whatever communication you use. But so it's verbal in the first instance whenever possible, followed up by written. So they have those 2 reference points. Can't retain lots of information because of the impairments of working memory and executive functions. Play to their interests. We spoke earlier about this idea of dopamine being key. The brain produces dopamine when it's interested. So the people with ADHD, when they have interest, will produce more dopamine. They're going to be more effective at doing whatever that task might be. Equally, if the task is difficult or boring or both, kryptonite, very difficult for them to do. So we want to play to their interest whenever we can do, whenever it's possible to do so. Not always, of course, by any means, because a lot of the work is not that. But whenever we can play to the person's interest, we're going to get a better, more productive response from them. I'm just going to take a sip of water whilst I move to this next slide. Patience and understanding. We've spoken about the prefrontal cortex, this sort of front part of the brain where executive functioning happens. If we apply pressure to this, so the person with ADHD who already struggles with executive functions, time management, planning, organization, execution, working memory, all of those impairments are going to be catalyzed. So it's going to be far more difficult for them to do things, which is why sometimes if you put them under pressure on the spot and ask them a question, their mind goes blank. There's nothing there. Okay, fog descends. So we just want to be really patient with the person, give them plenty of room whenever possible, and be understanding that they're trying their best to process whatever information it might be that you've asked them or told them, but it can take a while because of the reasons we mentioned around the PFC. So patience and understanding is key. And it's also really good for all of us because it makes us more chilled out. Communicate clearly and directly. We've touched on this idea before, so things need to be time-bound and specific. I'm going to say this a few times because it's so important. We need to clearly communicate what it is we would like the person to do and why we are asking them to do it. We might know why it's important and we're just like, do this thing because it's going to be great for your career. But if there's any ambiguity is a real roadblock for people with ADHD. If people with ADHD don't understand what it is that they're doing or what's going to happen, there's ambiguity there. That will often cause a great feeling of overwhelm. They're going to shut down. They're going to go into themselves. And again, they might say, nod and things like this and go, yeah, the marketing plan sounds amazing for the next 6 months or 12 months, whatever it might be. If they don't clearly understand it in a way that they've had time to absorb it and they understand the different bits, we're breaking big things into smaller chunks. Big things equal overwhelm. Ambiguity equals overwhelm. So we're keeping things clear and simple and concise whenever we can do. He says concise is somebody that can talk too much. Verbal processing. Breakdowns bigger tasks into smaller steps. So this idea that we take the bigger tasks, I mentioned a marketing plan there, it could be a release schedule, or it could be sort of a forthcoming tour. The person you're sharing this with, the artist might go, yep, that sounds fantastic, brilliant, but don't forget they can't do time, they can't do dates. That even if they nod very enthusiastically, they can't really absorb this information. So we're walking through very slowly, breaking down the tour that's coming up. Here's the tour schedule. What does that look like for you in the individual components? What does that look like for you in the individual parts? How do you feel about each of these parts? So they've got time to absorb and understand, because they might turn around and go, now that we've spoken about this one part of the tour feels really uncomfortable to me, for whatever set of reasons it might be. But they might not have identified that without your help. just by breaking it down, because otherwise they're just seeing this big, nebulous, overwhelming thing, which is the tour. So breaking big things into small chunks is super helpful. Avoid distractions. We mentioned earlier, ADHD is a deficit of attention for things. Every time we get distracted, it makes it very difficult for us to bring our attention back to what we were working on. If you tap somebody on the shoulder that has ADHD and you ask them, hey, what do you think about this thing? It's going to take them 20 minutes to half an hour to get back into whatever they were doing. We try and avoid disturbing people with ADHD whenever possible because it takes the brain so long to get into that task in the first place. Noise cancelling headphones. We talk a lot about environment design. We're keeping a clean, clear environment around us with as few visual distractions as possible. Noise cancelling headphones, great for when somebody's having to try and focus on something specific. And there's a whole range of different tools we can look at here, but we're trying to minimize the distractions as much as possible. This includes phone use. Phones are very, very challenging because of the way that they disrupt our dopamine levels. And if you've got time, I'll sort of touch on that a bit more. But the less we can engage with things that involve task switching, moving from phones to screens to people to conversations to phones, the better, the stronger and better the brain becomes. Offer positive reinforcement. It's a simple thing, but actually it goes a long way for people that have ADHD. It really matters. Am I doing the right thing? Am I going in the right direction? Is what I just did good? You know, that you might have experienced artists that have come off stage and everybody else is happy. The crowd loved it. The promoter's thrilled. You think it was amazing, but the artist is really down on themselves. They're not feeling it. Okay, for whatever reason. Why? Because the chances are they picked up on the one bad thing. There was somebody at the front of the crowd of 10,000 people who was looking bored or looking at their phone, or they missed a key or didn't hit a note, or a mix didn't quite go as tightly as they wanted to. That's what they focused in on. Everything else, 99% of it was amazing. They'll focus in on the 1% that wasn't. So positive reinforcement with evidence, always important. We're not just saying nice words. It's you've done these great things. And I think you're brilliant in these ways because you've done these great things. You know, and you're relating it back again and again to the evidence, because that's what's going to obviously make it believable for the person you're speaking to. Number 9, encourage the use of tools and strategies. I've got this little thing called a Pomodoro timer that lives on my desk. Breaking things down into 25-minute sprints. That's what that timer there is, and I've included the link on there. Got no financial relationship with this, but this is the best timer I found out of all of these. Why are we doing this? Because of time blindness. Digital clocks and timers don't work. Analog is the only way forward because we can see time passing. You can sort of see time elapsing, or going forward there, going backwards. And then we're doing these 25-minute sprints because that gives us time to have a 5-minute break. So the 25 minutes of focused work is generally thought to be intense enough to get the brain going and fired up and focused, but not exhausting. And then we're having a 5-minute break afterwards. Now, this differs, of course, for things like big creative work. So if an artist is going in to come up with a new sleeve design or actually a new concept for a track or an album, then there's going to be some time there where it's sort of really broad ideation. But of course, when the artist gets the track down, then this is where the artist is going to start looking at the different parts. Very easy for them to get lost on a specific thing, go into rabbit holes and not get finished. Same with touring, same with live work. Very easy for them to know that they've got a rehearsal schedule and just focus on one part of the rehearsal. They don't get the rest done, or know that they've got to get to one place. They get 99% or 90% of the way there, 80% of the way there, but they forgot they had to take the extra taxi or cab. Very difficult for them to allot their time and energy accurately to the things that they need to do. So using timers keeps time visible. We need to keep time visible in the brain of the person with ADHD at all times. Number 10, and we're going to pause in a second, but avoiding stigmatizing language. And this might sound so obvious, but with every person that I've worked with, so I've worked with over now 140, 150 people across 15, 16 countries. And some of these are sort of, you know, Grammy-nominated award-winning artists, Mobos, Brits, all of these sorts of things, right the way through to people that are just starting out. This is the same for all of them. This doesn't change, that in their mind's eye, and we can talk about the neuroscience behind this if we've got time, because it's quite cool. It's also quite interesting. But in their mind's eye, they are lazy. They are stupid. They are worthless. nobody likes. And this is why we often see, part of the reason that we often see a high rate of drug and alcohol use within the ADHD community. People with ADHD are about 70 to 75% more likely to have addiction issues than the general population. And obviously that probably goes up quite a lot in our business for the reasons we all know. Self-medication is a big part of it. So if the person's, especially if they're undiagnosed and they're not medicated, or they're diagnosed and they're not taking ADHD medication, which is a very personal choice, of course, but that drug and alcohol use, phone use, alcohol, nicotine, cocaine, cannabis, these are some of the main things that people with ADHD use to self-medicate, can all be reached for when they're feeling down on themselves. And so the use of stigmatizing language, like, try harder, come on, the sort of things we can sometimes say to friends and colleagues, when we're tired and not thinking right, that sort of stuff for people with ADHD can be absolutely debilitating. So using positive language as much as possible, affirming the work they're doing, and just giving them, as much support as you possibly can. So we're just going to pause there for a moment, and I'll ask Michelle if we've got any questions.
None so far. We can continue unless someone has a burning question to ask up until now.
Any questions? Anybody want to ask anything? Yeah.
Yes,
Kerry?
we have.
Yeah, just Tristan, are you doing okay in this presentation? Do you need to take a break?
Yeah, no, I'm good, thanks. But thank you for asking. Appreciate it. Thanks for checking, Kerry. I appreciate that. And what Kerry did there, so that's so helpful, right? That when we're working with people that do have ADHD, checking in, because they might seem fine, they might be doing whatever they're doing, but that actually the ability to understand ourselves and where we are and how we're feeling, that can weirdly be quite a challenge sometimes. So it's a great question. Thank you, Kerry. Is anything else from anybody else?
Yes, so we have here from Madeleine, when someone has a telephone addiction as self-medication, how can you best handle that in language?
Yeah, so if I'm hearing that right, sort of I'm going to just sort of surmise this is just telephone addiction. In general, smartphone use is very high. What we're looking to do is to break the connection behind what is a low-level behavioral addiction, which is the phone use. What we're talking about here is no phone use, ideally for the first hour and the last hour of each day. And then we're starting to look at how the phone is used through the day, where the phone sits, if they're in the recording studio, on the tour bus, is the phone always next to them? Or is it further away? Do they have to make effort to go and get the phone? If it's really strong, and there's a huge amount of detail here to unpack, but if I work with a number of clients who use lock boxes, so they have timer lock boxes which they can put their phone into for an extended period of time, however long they need, to prevent them from just picking the phone up or going to self-soothe. Running our phones on grayscale mode, which I'll try and share a link with Michelle after this call. I've been running my phone on grayscale now for about, I think, 5 or 6 years, since I was introduced by a very well-known industry person to this. It's so effective. Suddenly our smartphones become so boring when we're running them on grayscale. And we realize a number of times we pick the phone up absent-mindedly, there's nothing there. We don't really want to engage with it. So there's a number of sort of what we might sort of like behavioral adaptations that we can do to change people's habits around phone use, but certainly helping the artist person understand as much as possible how detrimental phone use can be is its sort of starting point and why, but then also just putting in as many barriers as possible to phone use when it's not elective. Phones are great, but it's got to be elective and intentional rather than just this self-soothing technique. I hope that makes sense. It's quite a detailed topic, but I hope that's a useful top contour.
Thank you. We have another one. What's the best way to offer constructive criticism about something that we see can be improved?
Okay, great
Antonio.
question. Great question, Antonio. So when offering criticism, it's about trying to understand it from the other person's perspective, and lots of this will be sort of familiar to you already, is we're asking them for their account of whatever's happened. That show you just played, how was that for you? Maybe you noticed their stagecraft was a bit off, or the way that they were engaging with their fellow bandmates wasn't quite on point, whatever it might be. So you've got an idea of what you want to discuss with them. We're just giving the person the opportunity to raise that themselves. You know, ideally that they're going to notice that themselves, and that you're going to just ask them questions like, can you say a bit more about that? That sounds really interesting. How was that for you? Oh, okay. Now I'm hearing you. They're not. Yeah, I saw the same thing. That's interesting. And that we're sort of having a conversation. We're not telling them what to do. We're not ordering them. If it feels confining or restricting, or we feel like we're being, I say we as somebody who's got ADHD, if we feel like we're being ordered around, you're going to lose their engagement very, very quickly. So it's about framing the question, framing the criticism or the feedback, the constructive criticism or feedback in a very constructive way that's ideally posed as a question in the first instance. And again, there's more that we can discuss there, but hopefully that's a useful starting. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you. There is another one. Do you have any recommendations for other helpful tools? Are any of the digital time management apps useful? I find that the thought of onboarding to one of those apps is a bit overwhelming. By Elise.
Thank you, Elise. Yes, I think you're right that with the clients that I work with, we try and avoid digital as much as possible. That's not to say that the client might have digital devices they find very useful, you know, tools that are already useful to them. Great, we'll lean in and amplify those. But generally speaking, the less screen time we've got, the better, and the less we're reliant on digital anything, the better. Because of course, the timer, the online Pomodoro timer or whatever it might be, if if we go and use that, there's a much higher chance of us tripping ourselves up and opening Instagram or having a quick look on socials or checking our email or whatever it might be. So with all of those digital devices, my recommendation is to look for an analog alternative whenever possible. I hope that's useful. Was there any other question?
We can continue.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Welcome. So I'm going to move through this reasonably quickly, but we can also pause for some more questions shortly. So what skills do you need to effectively help your artists? And again, some of these apply sort of to people who aren't neurodiverse. So hopefully that's useful to people on the call that sort of a broader roster as well, of course. Certainly with ADHD, the more knowledge you've got of it, the better. The better we understand the condition, the more able we are to help the person, because we can see why they're showing up in certain ways. We suddenly realize that this is a neurobiological condition that is impacting their behavior. Then it's not willful. And it can feel willful sometimes, but so many of these behaviors and ways of being, they're not willful. So you've got the person's mind, we've got the person's brain. ADHD is a fundamental rewiring of our brains. Our nervous systems are different: touch, taste, sight, sound, smell, etc. Auditory side of things. So the more we can understand about the condition, the better able we are to go, hang on, I think that might be your ADHD that's showing up there in your mind's eye, and then you can ask questions and see what the person's experience is. Understanding personal ADHD experience. If you have ADHD, which I imagine, given the number of people on this call, there's certainly going to be one or two of us, beyond myself probably, that are on here that have ADHD, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. Leverage your experience. So the more you can understand and leverage your own experience, the better. But just avoiding projections, of course. We're thinking back to our own experience of things and seeing how we can use that to help the person, but just being mindful not to project onto them. Emotional intelligence, higher degree of emotional intelligence is going to allow us to help people in a much better way. I'm just going to have a quick sip of water, I think. There's four main areas of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is our ability to understand emotions in a variety of different ways. And there's something called theory of mind, which comes in here as well, understanding what it's like to be Michelle or me, or, you know, but from another person's perspective. The more we can understand theory of mind, the better we are to cater to that person's needs. So first one is self-awareness. The more you can help your artists, and this goes for ourselves as well, very much, because this goes both ways. This is for the person we're working with and for ourselves. The more self-aware we can become, the better able we are to see where we're showing up in good, bad, and different ways. Empathy and understanding. What's it like to experience that thing, understanding that person, meeting them where they are, not where we think they are. Super, super helpful. The more we can do that, the more in tune we'll be with that individual. Self-regulation. Self-regulation, this can be a huge challenge for people with ADHD, certainly. Emotional dysregulation, we hear this term mentioned often. It is a a complete dysregulation of emotions. We're not able to appraise a subject or an event in a way that is healthy and appropriate. We feel absolutely overwhelmed by it, angry, sad, whatever it might be. The better we are able to work on our own self-regulation, the more able we are to lead a comfy, happy life ourselves, but also to help other people. Social skills. I'm sure that lots of us on here have social skills that range somewhere between being amazing and awful, and somewhere in between, depending on the time of day, where we are, who we're with, a whole range of different things. But of course, the more that we can improve these social skills, the more able we are to have constructive relationships with people. So I'll briefly pause there. Were there any questions at all, Michelle?
Not yet. Let's see if anyone would like to ask any questions. For those asking about the recording, it will be available in the upcoming days, and it will be sent along with the presentation as well. So I think we can continue, Tristan.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. So when it comes to ADHD, the better our listening skills are, the more effective we're going to be able to help the person. Having good listening skills, hearing where they are. And I think it was Antonio that asked the question earlier about sort of how to phrase, and if it wasn't, forgive me for my own working memory not working well, but how to phrase constructive feedback, critique. Really hearing the person's needs is going to help you to frame and position that feedback better. Non-judgmental attitudes, again, just sort of differentiating between mind and neurobiology. Person's brain, ADHD is a condition that we're born with. It can be made, it's what's known also as a situational condition. That's to say that depending on the situation we're in, symptoms might decrease or they might increase. Very stressful, anxiety-provoking situation with lots of noise and distractions around it, probably going to see the person's symptoms increasing quite dramatically. Conversely, somewhere that's really chilled, and this is often, you know, things like the studio or backstage or wherever it might be, where there's not too many people, and the environment's quiet, that's going to help the person to regulate. Great tip here for your artists, and especially before they're going to perform if they've got ADHD. Having a green room, having a backstage area that, if they've got the condition, is genuinely quiet as much as it can be, of course, in a live environment, but it's free of groupies and hangers-on and press, whoever else it might be, certainly before the person's going to perform. Because they might be vibing and loving all of that stuff, but it's going to use up a huge amount of their energy, and it can leave them quite dysregulated, even if they're not aware, which we come back to that other point about how aware we are. We're great. It's kind of like the little kid running around at the party, eating all of the chocolates, wanting to do more, and it's fun and fun and fun. But we do that in a parenting, but we just step and go, I think we're just going to just tone this down, just bring this down a notch, because we know when it's going to end. It's going to end in upset. The person's going to be very dysregulated, perhaps, if it's too overwhelming. So we're carrying a non-judgmental attitude, just seeing how they are, showing up and supporting as much as we can do. Problem-solving skills, we've spoken about the prefrontal cortex and the impairment of executive functions. It makes it very difficult for people with ADHD to think through problems. We go from A to Z. We don't see the alphabet in between. We don't see the event really far in front. It's all going to be fine. Yeah, that sounds great. We'll do that. Perfect, no problems. So the more you can help your artist to think through problems from all the different angles, that sounds great. That's a really great idea. Can you see any flags? Are there any red flags for you around that? Is there anything we're missing? Asking them questions like that to help them problem solve is a huge help. Goal setting and motivation. So clearly defining what the goal is going to help reduce ambiguity. Understanding how to get to the goal is going to reduce ambiguity. Breaking the goal down into bite-sized chunks that are manageable, it's going to reduce overwhelm. So when we set goals, they might be really far in the future. There might be a lot in between. We just want to do those different steps in order for the person we're working with to really appreciate and understand what's involved, and not feel overwhelmed by the process ahead. They're going to be much more effective at getting to where they need to be then. Organizational skills, we sort of touched on this in terms of the limitations of the prefrontal cortex. We want to help this person organize. Now, as managers, of course, this is what you're doing day to day. This is, sort of bread and butter stuff, of course. but we want to break down those bigger tasks into even smaller tasks. You know, that we are sometimes with people with ADHD, we are helping them with the minutiae of the travel details. You know, it's no good. They just have tickets and an itinerary, that we're checking in with them, maybe through the steps of that tour, of that journey, so that they really have a good grip on what's coming up and when they need to be, where they need to be. You know, okay, you've got an artist, they're in a hotel, they know that they're meant to be catching a tour bus that morning or flying out that day, but this is where a phone call comes in. Just checking in with them, a few phone calls through the course of the day up until they get onto that transport can be hugely helpful, because they're cool. They've got this. It's fine. They're having breakfast and things. They haven't even packed their bags and they need to go in like 20 minutes. They haven't allowed for that time to get back up, to pack their bags, to go and get the cab to the airport. So again, just helping with this organizational framework as much as possible, creating a scaffold around them is super helpful. So accountability, this is very much about you saying to your artist or colleague or whoever you're working with that might have ADHD, how can I help you be accountable to your goals? Okay, so this is not prescriptive. We're not telling them what to do. We're asking. This is an invitation for help. How can I help you get to where you want to be? And what are the sort of things I can do where we can check in and make sure that you're going in the right direction? They can then hopefully tell you, well, I want to do these things by these dates and these times. Yeah, are you sure? Does that make sense? Just double checking. Yeah, okay, great. So then when you're having your management calls with them or regular catch-ups, you're able to sort of just check in on that accountability side. How's that going with these different elements? You know, making them aware of time. That thing that was a year away, it's now 6 months away. That thing that was 6 months away, that's now 3 months away. You know, we're walking the person back very gradually from the event that's been far away, because of the time blindness. They won't be able to see the event. They won't feel the event until it's right in front of them. And then obviously things get a bit panicky. I'll pause there for a moment. Did anyone have any questions?
No, not the chat.
No. Just checking. It says on my chat it's got 70 on there. Is that just because that's the number of people that are on the call?
It's 53. That's
Okay.
the number of people that were in the call. Yeah.
Just on the chat it says it's 70. So I haven't looked at those messages, but
don't worry, those are the questions and
just
the chat.
got it. Okay,
Yeah.
fine, perfect, all good. Thank you. Great stuff. Okay. Boundary setting. So if we're working with people with ADHD, their boundaries are probably going to be pretty porous. So that means as a manager, you might be getting phone calls at all times in the day that are very panicked. You know, you're waking up to a million WhatsApp messages, emails, carrier pigeons on the windowsill, God knows what. The person has had all of these thoughts and feelings. And we touched on this idea of verbal processing earlier. People with ADHD often verbally process, some process quite heavily, lots of talking to get them to that point. You already kind of see where they want to go with it, but they need to sort of talk themselves around to that point to fully understand it. And they can do that via text communications as well. So, and a whole variety of different ways, but certainly with boundaries, this is something that people with ADHD often really struggle with, whether that's letting people into their lives, or letting information, opportunities, whatever it might be, too much of these things into their world, that can leave them feeling incredibly overwhelmed. And of course, then they'll shut down, they won't be able to operate. As a manager, of course, you want to be there for your artists as much as you possibly can, but creating, if you haven't done so already, very clear delineated boundaries of what is acceptable communication, when you're available, when you won't be available, all of these things. And again, I know a lot of this is standard, I'm sure, to most of you on here, is key, because if that's not explicitly spoken about and written down in black and white, then there'll be ambiguity. And the artist will just think you're there for them whenever, and they will reach out. And if this happens early on in a relationship, of course, that sets up a very challenging precedent for the future. It's going to make it very difficult for you as a manager not to feel run ragged by that artist that's constantly throwing messages, calling you, turning up at your house, whatever it might be, and expecting things of you. So boundary setting is absolutely a key point. Self-compassion. People with ADHD are awful at self-compassion, and we all can be, just in the broader population, challenged by it. If you're working with somebody that's got ADHD, please have a lot of self-compassion for yourself, because it can be very challenging. we're great people, honest. And I'm sure many of you know people with ADHD or have ADHD yourself. But we can also be, the condition can make things very, very challenging for the individual. It's not willful, this is neurobiology. And that can mean that they act out or show up in certain ways that they really don't want to, but they do. And they can feel bad about that. We can feel bad about that. So just this idea of inner kindness, being kind to ourselves, and our artists being kind to themselves is really important. Confidentiality and professionalism, I don't, of course, really need to touch on this at all. I'm sure that everybody on this call is already on board with this idea. We need to be absolutely confidential in the way that we interact with our artists and our colleagues around us, in order for them to feel safe and secure, that they can really share things with us, that you're really trusted, and that you can hear them. That goes back to that point about being heard. Often people with ADHD never feel like they've really been heard. So the more they can feel heard and safe, the more likely they are to open up. And the more likely they are to open up, the greater the chances are that you can work through whatever challenge they have to a more successful place. Cultural competence, understanding where the person's come from, and the ramifications that might have on their ADHD. This is political, socioeconomic, gender. There's a whole range of different topics. I mean, in the UK, it's got quite a lot of attention recently, which is really positive. People of colour, Black people specifically, Black community is very reticent often to acknowledge ADHD in a way that's helpful. It's often still seen as a very stigmatized issue. And I was talking to someone about this from their first-hand experience the other day. But there's been a lot of press in the news about this in the UK recently. So that for one person, you might have one artist that's happy to talk about their ADHD. They feel really empowered. They've done lots of learning, and really easy engaging with you about it. But another artist from a different background, they might find far more difficult. So just worth bearing in mind when you're talking that one person's ADHD will be different from another person's ADHD, and for a whole set of reasons, but also the cultural background they come from might influence how comfortable they do or don't feel talking about the topic. Resilience and determination. We need to support the person to go back again and again and again to do the things they want to go and do. It's really hard having this condition sometimes. It can be very upsetting. All the creativity it gives us and all of the wonderful aspects of interrelations and things like that are there 100%. And I would not be ADHD. It's made me who I am, and it's enabled me to get to where I am. I firmly believe. But we need to help ourselves, certainly, but certainly artists with that resilience and determination. And of course, a sense of humour. It never goes wrong. That all of this can sometimes be quite intense work, but it can also be a lot of fun. And we often find that people with ADHD are huge fun. They have a really good sense of humour, and they're really naughty about what they do in terms of being playful and things like this. The life and soul of the party, and essentially can be a huge amount of fun to be around. So we can have a joke, have a laugh, and hopefully really enjoy this process of learning with the person that we are supporting, and whether it's a colleague or an artist, that this journey of understanding can be one that's quite joyful and hopefully fun for both parties. Quick summary of skills. I won't go into these in detail because you'll get these as a follow-up, and feel free to have a look through, sort of see what you're doing already and what you can maybe improve on. And that's really what this slide is just asking here. But what are you doing at the moment? What's going well? Maybe what's not? Where is there space for development based upon what we've discussed so far? And where can you maybe put a bit more time into sort of your own understanding and training? Some further resources on ADHD. Again, I sort of won't linger on this. Attitude magazine is the best free publication on ADHD, bar none. You can subscribe. I subscribe because I want to support it, but it's free to access. Medical level information, really reputable, very trusted source of information. And I'll leave you to sort of like move through the others if you feel that they're relevant. All great links, bit UK focused. Apologies for that. It's actually quite difficult. I've got clients throughout Europe. Quite difficult to find really good quality resources throughout the rest of Europe. I'm working across France, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Austria. I mean, Spain. It's still challenging. We still need a lot more information out there, but hopefully those resources are a good starting point. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for your time and attention and for listening. I hope it's been useful and the information I've shared today can be applied in a way that's just that useful for the work that you're doing. Feel free to reach out. My details are on here. I think Michelle's going to share them as well in a follow-up email. If you have any other questions, if there's no more questions at the end here, then feel free to email me. I've included my assistant's email on there. And please do email her as well, so she helps to organize me because I need that structure around me. But yeah, happy to help with any questions that anyone might have beyond this call. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Tristan. We have one more question from Carrie. Is it okay to ask artists if they have ADHD? If I suspect an artist is ADHD, can I ask them if they haven't volunteered the information?
It's a great question. It's a great question because it's such a delicate question. So this is about knowing the person. This is about the extent to which you have a relationship with them. If the person's spoken about the fact they think they might have ADHD, if they've talked about it in the round and, you know, I think I've got, I keep reading about ADHD, I've got all these traits that's, you know, if they feel like, I feel like I've got ADHD, that kind of thing. And that's a far easier path in. And then you go, okay, well, can you tell me a bit more about that? What does that look like? And, you know, how's that showing up for you? And then maybe looking back with what we discussed today, if, you know, if they're having these persistent challenges, there is actually there's an ADHD test, which I developed from the DSM-5, which is on my website, which just takes 2 minutes to do. You might choose to say, have you ever tried to do a test around ADHD? Because you a little score, and as to whether or not that person might want to go and see a psychiatrist for a formal diagnosis. That's kind of the approach we'd be using for somebody that's been talking about it. Much easier, of course, because the chances are they're going to be more receptive to it. If, however, this is your observation and they've never mentioned it, then that's not really for us to say. And unless it's got to a point in the relationship where there's, you know, it's looking like the relationship might break down between yourself and the artist, in which case we're sort of like, then we're starting to maybe have some chats to sort of psychiatrists and medical professionals, you know, people that have medical understanding, if we've got concerns for the health and well-being, of course. But that we're not really in a position to pathologize somebody else. You know, we might really feel that the person's got ADHD based upon what we know, but we're not diagnostic professionals. So we just can be really frustrating sometimes, but we just need to take a back seat on that one and allow the person hopefully find their way to their own understanding. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much. There is another one. What would be the best first resource for someone who is just finding out they might have ADHD?
So there's different avenues to approach. You can hopefully do a lot of reading and research. That's a great place to start. As I said, Attitude magazine, please do. If you've got an artist that's got ADHD, please share that link with them. It's such a great resource. It's not music specific, but the information there's very high quality. It's very accessible. So that's a really good place to start. You can reach out to psychiatrists and CBT specialists that are specialists in the condition. I highlight the word specialist. Really important that the person, the professional, the healthcare professional, whoever it is, has an expert understanding of the condition, because otherwise it's really easy to get it confused with other things and not understand that person's lived experience. Of course, there's services like mine in terms of coaching. I offer a free 30-minute call, so people can have a chat. You know, they say some stuff, I say some stuff back to them, and then if they're sort of like nodding a lot, going, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, then we might do a piece of work together. But really giving them a structure in which they can operate successfully is key. This comes back to the idea of having a routine. Routine is at the heart of everything we do. Without a routine, it's anyone's guess as to what's going to happen. Good days, bad days, indifferent. So the routine is absolutely key, and that takes work. Even if the person's got medication, they've got a diagnosis for the condition, and they've got medication. You say pills aren't skills. Pills help us to focus. The ADHD medication, of which there's 2 different types, amphetamine, methylphenidate, they help us to focus. They can help with our emotional regulation, but they're not going to give us the infrastructure, scaffold, the routine by which to lead a more sort of productive, effective life. So they would be the sort of immediate avenues. coaching, CBT, psychotherapy, those sorts of things, providing it's with an expert who's specialist in that area.
Thank you so much. We have another one. Management is definitely a long-term game. As a manager with ADHD myself, after working with an artist several years, and I feel I've absolutely hyper-focused on it and given all my time and energy fully for many years. But now, as the novelty and initial excitement has sort of changed a little over the years, I sometimes struggle to have the same motivation, strength levels, but also want to make sure I give my all to grow and support the artists, as I do fully believe in them. Is there any advice how to reignite that lovely hyper-focused passion?
It's a great question. It's a massive question. This comes back down to the way that the ADHD brain works. We spoke about at the top of the call, it's sort of showing up to work in two different states. One, interest equals dopamine. If there's interest, the brain will kick into gear. We can have focus, hyperfocus, or urgency with severe consequences. Essentially, and I know we're tight for time, so I'll be brief. If the interest is absent, it's going to be very difficult to re-engage in whatever the task may be. Intellectually, we might want to do it. We know it's good for us. We've told people we're going to do it. You know, that on every single level, we understand that this is something we should be doing. Okay, using the word should there specifically. But unless we want to, unless there's an innate sense of powerful interest in doing the thing, chances are the brain's not going to kick into gear and produce the dopamine needed to engage in that thing, whatever it might be, a career, a person, an event, travel. Even if once we loved it, once the interest goes, it can be, not always, but it can be challenging to re-engage the brain. That's when we do in coaching, we look at all of the different aspects around it. Is it something else that's reduced the interest? Have other things come into our lives that have impacted our interest levels? Or is it the actual thing at hand that we've lost interest in? So it's worth just sort of teasing out the different bits to be clear before making a decision. I hope that helps.
And we have one last one. We have 2 more minutes. Advice to avoid ADHD burnout.
Everything that we've discussed in this call today. Routine is at the heart of it. Regular breaks. We need to have micro breaks throughout the course of the day. We spoke about the Pomodoro timer, 25-minute sprint, 5-minute break, when we're not going into deep ideation for new creative ideas. Regular breaks in the year. If an artist has a busy touring schedule, we're helping them to arrive at a place where they're building in breaks. They're taking these crazy things called holidays, where they actually have some time away where they're not engaging their brain in anything. Without those regular breaks through the course of the day, breaks through the course of the week, breaks through the course of the year, the person will inevitably, especially within our business, with the intensity and kinetic side of it, the person will almost inevitably end up feeling overwhelmed and go into a place of exhaustion. So having, I would say that's sort of key takeaway, regular breaks through the day, regular breaks through the week, month, regular breaks through the year.
Thank you so much. Do you have time for one more question?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any tip on tackling masking with artists?
Yes. So again, this is a very deep topic, but why do we mask? We mask because we have a lifetime of failure, of thinking that we're not good enough, of wanting to people please. There's so many different reasons to why people mask. It's there to try and essentially keep the person safe, that they're doing it to keep themselves safe. So when we talk about masking, unmasking, we're doing it very gently. This is with the person's full consent. It's something they want to do. It's elective for each and every situation, each and every opportunity. It's not just a blanket thing. That with each event that might be coming up, literally an event, a show, a gig, a press meeting, whatever it could be, we're consulting with the person. How do you feel about this? How are you feeling at the moment? Helping them to understand where they are in terms of themselves. How comfortable do you feel in this instance? Maybe showing a little bit more of yourself. Maybe unmasking a little bit, because you mentioned with making the assumption they've said they want to unmask to some degree over time. How comfortable do you feel unmasking a little bit more today? And just giving them that sense check, because of course what we don't want is the person to overshare and then feel very exposed and naked in that environment and come away from maybe a press interview or something like that going, oh my God, I've just told them my life story. I've gone into verbal processing mode. I wanted to unmask, but now I've unmasked too much and now I feel really vulnerable. And of course, then they're going to feel overwhelmed, and that can really affect their mental health. So the process of talking about masking and unmasking is done very gently, and obviously with the person's full consent.
Thank you so much, Tristan, for such a wonderful and useful presentation. And thank you everybody else for staying till the end. I will be sharing the presentation and the recording in the upcoming days, and also Tristan contact details. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope to see you very, very soon.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.